Good morning and welcome to the session Families and Addiction Thriving Through the Chaos. My name is Shelby Maruschek and I will be your moderator for this session. I would like to introduce our speaker for this session, KL Wells. KL is the daughter, sister, ex-wife, and mother of an addict. As the founder and CEO of Voices and Courage, her mission is to help families and parents navigate addiction's chaos and learn to thrive. With over 30 years of experience in executive coaching and business consulting, KL drives transformative change, both individually and collectively. As a community leader, influential speaker, and family advocate who now resides in Eugene, Oregon, KL's mission is clear: to inspire hope and empower lives. With that, please join me in welcoming KL Wells.
Thank you, Selby. Okay, let's begin. So, August 25th, 2018. I'm standing on a sidewalk in Washington State while I'm witnessing the arrest of my son. He was 27. His name's Sam, and he is in drug psychosis. The arrest was at gunpoint. And as I stood on that sidewalk, every dream for him that I ever had shattered. It had been a long day already. We had driven up from Oregon to Washington and picked him up, fed him. I can say that quite honestly, it is quite shocking when you have a 27-year-old who continues to ask you the same question over and over and over again, because in the psychotic episode that he was experiencing, he couldn't retain any information. And he was in paranoia also, so he kept looking at me to reassure him that he was okay. And then what happened was we got to a hotel room. He believed that the restaurant that we went to, the waitress had poisoned him, and he exited the hotel. Little did I know, he went to a hospital just around the corner, didn't know the area very well. And then pretty soon I was just left with, okay, what do we do now? Because we didn't have a plan and we're kind of waiting. Do we move or not move? And I hear sirens. And I look out the window and I'm watching my son walk up the sidewalk with a bottle of water, and I'm watching a police officer pull up behind him, yelling at him to drop to his knees and pulling his gun out. And so I run down the stairs and then I am on the sidewalk. At that point, there are 4 other police officers there. And I'm just telling the woman officer, I'm the mom, which is a completely surreal experience. And so I'm giving her the information of what's happening for him. And then I lock eyes with Sam, who is at this point on the ground being handcuffed, and they're lifting him up to move him to the car to take him to jail. And he's screaming at me to save him. That was a life-altering moment for me. Quite frankly, in the moment was very traumatic. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But everything shattered in that moment. And I really did believe while he was being arrested that actually saved his life. Because at that point, we had no options. And jail was the option to get him into a secure location with a roof over his head and 3 squares and that sort of thing. At that point, we have no idea how long this psychosis is going to last. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is I'm going to ask you to write down, based on that story, what's the first feeling that you feel? And what's the first thought that goes through your mind when you hear that story? First feeling, first thought. Because part of this, I believe, is being able to get somewhat into my experience to understand what's happening. So what's happening for you? So what's happening for me? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? I just felt like I got shot into uncharted territory. I've never been around an arrest before. I've never had a family member arrested before. I'm heartbroken on that sidewalk. It's traumatic to watch your own child being arrested for the first time. I'm afraid of what's going to happen. So there's this whole world of unknown that just opened up for me. I'm intensely worried. And I also realize that I'm aware of, it's almost like I'm having an out of body experience. I'm watching myself on the sidewalk. And so that awareness allowed me to pause in the moment and actually be choiceful about how I was on that sidewalk. I wanted to be on the love on the sidewalk for my son in one of the worst moments of his life. And that's, in fact, who I was in that moment. And internally, as I'm crumbling, externally, I am that love for him. Fast forward 3 days. I'd done enough in between, and I'll go back to that later, to be able to go and do my work. So Tuesday, I walk into a corporate executive meeting with one of the clients I love really working with the most. And I'm meeting with the executive team. This is a fast-growing company. And I realized that the energy is really off. And I'm ushered back into the conference room. And I'm very quickly told that the CEO's 26-year-old son passed away from a drug overdose on Saturday. Okay, here we go. I witnessed my son's arrest on Saturday. This CEO lost her son to a drug overdose on Saturday. She is in Mexico retrieving his body. The executives in the room are in shock. Now, there's a moment where I thought, holy crap. I'm confronted with it again. And I was very clear that the fear that was in their eyes was almost like looking back at myself in a mirror. So I took a deep breath and I put myself aside and I held the space for them. And this went on for months. I went to the celebration of life for them in the midst of all the things that I was dealing with my son. So I'm dealing with two things, professionally and personally at the same time. So I come home from that day and I'm confronted with Sam had gone to the court that day because it was a first arrest for him. And I'm not sure exactly why, but they released him. And he was still in drug psychosis. So within 2 hours, he is rearrested with more charges. And we're left with just basically watching through e-file open court documents kind of what's happening. So again, personally, professionally, I'm in the thick of it. So again, you hear this story. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? First thought, first thinking, first feeling. So what am I thinking? What am I feeling? This is where inside the mind of a mom or a parent or somebody who loves somebody who's dealing with this, I think is really important to grasp. And so here's what I think about is the emotions that I was feeling that day were multiplicity of emotions. First was I was shocked. I was stunned on that sidewalk. I was almost panicked and holding it together at the same time. So I was in the red zone. What I'll tell you is most people can only identify three, average American can identify three emotions: happy, sad, and angry. So I was able to articulate what was going on for me: massive concern, massive worry, stepping into the unknown. Once I got back up to the hotel room, I actually completely lost it. I fell to my knees and was completely inconsolable. I allowed myself, I gave myself permission to feel all the stuff that was running inside of me and get to the other side. And so then I dropped into the blue zone, which was, I was incredibly sad. I would say exhausted. This is an exhausting experience, massively fatigued, drained, spent, hopeless, not knowing what's going to happen next. So we're left with believing that Sam's life has been saved by the arrest. At the same time, potentially the system might have failed him by re-releasing him. Will he be safe? What's going to happen with him? How will he be handled? Second arrest? What's next? And really, honestly, how do I navigate the judicial system when I've never been here before? So that night, losing it, crying, I cried until I was done. I just allowed myself permission. And then when I was done crying, I did eat and then I slept and I slept and I slept. I was just completely exhausted. And then the next morning, as we're driving back down to our home in Eugene, Oregon, I get on the phone with one of my closest friends up in the Washington area who is incredibly networked. And I said, I need help. Who do you know? Who do you know that can help me figure out how to navigate the system? So the first person she connected me with was Grace, that she knew in the system, and I reached out to Grace. And these are the lifelines that helped keep me sane and centered, along with other things that I'll talk about in a little bit. Was Grace was immediately responsive to me in terms of who I needed to connect with within the jail system, which was Kristen. And Kristen was the one who was able to give me information about Sam on a fairly regular basis. Now, I didn't abuse it. I would call every maybe 2 days, 3 days, depending on how much information I was able to get through the system, just to check on him. At this point, he's in isolation. There's no protocols for meth. So he is detoxing completely on his own. This feels pretty dire. And at the same time, we're just kind of waiting. Is he going to come out of the psychosis or not? And I'll tell you at this point, it took 5 weeks before he finally started to reemerge. And I was able to talk to him on the phone, and he made more sense than he had in a long time. In those moments, you wonder, are they going to come out of the psychosis? Or is this just going to be irreparable? So by the time the 5 weeks was up, he'd already had a psychological evaluation. He was slated to go to the mental health institute in the town. And that was months before he could get a bed. So he's just in solitary confinement, basically. And third, in terms of sanity, was the e-filed open court documents. That was so helpful to be able to have a touchstone. So those 2 women and the open court documents was mission critical. So here's what I would say, what I learned through this process in working with Grace and Kristen. And I reached back out to both of them to say thank you on multiple occasions for who they were in my life at one of the worst moments of my life, to let them know that this is what they did for me that helped me, again, stay centered and be more choice who I wanted to be as a mom in the midst of this experience for myself and for my son and for my family. And so they stayed emotionally centered. So they stayed as the calm in my storm. And then I learned from them more about how to be the calm in my own storm, but also how to be the calm in my family's storm. And that skill set, and I say skill set because they learned how to do it, everybody can learn. And it's been a skill set that I've embraced and have gotten much better and much better and much better at. Again, I put myself aside. They put themselves aside. And they were present for me. They listened to me. They heard what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and held the space for me in the experience. And what I am profoundly grateful for was the fact that they cared. They acknowledged my fears and my feelings, and they helped me step through what would help me next. What was the next step, the next steps to take. So there's a lot of learning just in this one slide in and of itself, not only in terms of my experience, but then what I did in my family's experience, and then potentially what you can do in other families' experiences. So I'm a big researcher, and one of the things that I learned along the way was the brain science piece. And so when something happens, it goes into our limbic system. We make a decision as to what we want to do with it. It goes up into our neocortex where we're able to make confident, clear, creative decisions, or it drops down into our brainstem where we are reactionary, we're triggered, we're angry, we're stressed, we're frustrated, we're awash in cortisol, the stress hormone. Really not helpful. Our decision making is basically halved. So I became a student of brain science and learning how to, when I started to get angry or frustrated or feel those emotions of, oh my goodness, what am I do now? I created tools for myself to get myself back up into the neocortex so that I could make better decisions. I could be creative. I could be confident in who I was and how I was moving forward. This was game changing for me. So, what are the key things that I did also in taking care of myself? So, self care became absolutely mission critical, non negotiable. And so I created a plan for myself. And you can see by this, I cried what I needed to cry. So I allowed myself to feel. I exercised daily. I asked for help routinely because it took a tribe to surround myself with in order to be able to hold the center and be who I wanted to be in the midst of this. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I got informed. So I read as much information as possible, watched videos, listened to podcasts. Sleep was really a challenge on the front end because, you're worried. And so the worry would keep me up at night. And so slowly but surely through the last years, I have created a sleep regimen, and sleep is mission critical in order to be able to stay sane in the midst of the crazy and the chaos. I spent a lot of time outside. I'm a hiker and a backpacker, and I backpacked every summer, no matter what was happening with Sam, because that was mission critical and sanity creating for me. I built support communities, I got counseling, and I created a practice of gratitude. Now, I want to be really clear about this. This didn't happen overnight. This was a progression over the years. It's been now almost 6 years since that particular arrest, and it's still a work in progress for me. And so, but these things really do help me stay whole and centered. And everybody that I coach and train on, the parents, the loved ones of other addicts, this is the foundation from which they can thrive. So I'm a big believer in choice and being intentional. That is my power. So again, digital learning, books, podcasts, videos. So I kept learning. So one of the things I learned was that NIH reports it takes 5 to 6 rehabs before recovery takes hold. Okay, well, Sam took 12. And every time a relapse happens or a rehab happens, as a parent, you think, oh, here we are. We're good. You don't know that on average, it's going to take 5 to 6. So you go through this roller coaster of up and down. And I needed to flatten out the roller coaster. And that information was super helpful. And as it turned out, we had 12. So what else I learned was from Pew Research, 50% of American families love someone who is addicted. That was stunning to me. And so, what I know to be true is of the people that are listening on this call right now, you may be in the system, in the institutions of corrections. You are also a human being first. And I'm betting half of you have somebody that you love. So, I'm not just talking to you as a mom, I'm also talking to you as a human, to another human, about how can you help yourself navigate in the midst of loving somebody. You know, what I also learned, 70% of females, 56% of males have been sexually abused. So the trauma below the surface that resides below the surface drives a lot of the addiction. And then the Health Policy Institute, this was stunning to me. Of the $532 billion it's spent annually, it's going towards the addict and recovery. Very little of that is going towards the family members or friends. So then what do we do? And in a time when we are 500,000 to 5 million counselors short, there's a huge vacuum here. So I just kept learning and moving forward. So this was a pivotal piece that I learned from watching Pleasure Unwoven by Dr. Kevin McCauley, who is a recovering addict himself, but also a doctor, and went down the journey himself of discovering, is this a choice or is this a disease? So if you're addicted, the addiction actually takes the first position in your brain in terms of survival. So it's why you watch somebody that you love, that when they're in non-addictive mode, they are, my son is like light and bright and brilliant and fun to be around and just an extraordinary human being. When he's in addiction mode, survival number one is getting the next hit. So a year ago, when he relapsed again on fentanyl, it hijacked his brain, first position. His whole day is taken up with getting the next hit. And so his life's hijacked. What do you do then? So by then I had learned to love him with boundaries. But at that point, no more money. Absolutely. I got through that piece, which was, I think, personally one of the hardest things to say no. And I'll tell you why, is because when I hit that Cash App send, I instantaneously personally felt better. I felt like I was doing something. And I desperately wanted to do something as a mom. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't control it. I couldn't change it. But that was one thing that I could do. And then I got super clear that I was hitting the Cash App send because it made me feel better. It made me feel better. And I thought, oh my God, okay, I got to rethink this. I got to retrain myself because I don't want to be the one who sends him the last $10. So I tackled that and finally got on the other side of the clarity around that. And slowly but surely, Sam didn't ask for money anymore because he wasn't going to get it. So the power of decision, this was a pivotal moment for me in deciding that a lot of what happens is parents and friends get pulled down by the tentacles of this disease into the sadness and the trauma themselves. And so everybody's in this mix of trauma and crisis and chaos and desperation. Well, wow, that is just not helpful. And it doesn't help the addict. And so I made a very clear decision when I found another piece of information that I wanted to be thriving when or if he ever popped out the other side of his addiction. Okay, so that's a bold aspiration. And I didn't find a lot of thriving examples, but I was willing to lean into it and find a way to figure out how to be that thriving mama on the other side of his addiction when or if he ever came out the other side. And I refused to let his addiction take my power away and ruin the other parts of my life. So Those two declarations and convictions on my part were mission critical. So here's a piece I found. This is actually published by the National Fallen Firefighters Association. It's a brilliant piece, and it became a central piece of what I was doing. So you can see, excuse me, thriving, there's a descriptor there. So now I had a description of what thriving actually looked like, sounded like, and felt like. Well, where was I on this scale? Was I in crisis, struggling, or surviving? By the time I found this, I was toggling between struggling and surviving. And I did not want to just survive this. I really, truly wanted to thrive. So I aimed towards the thriving vertical here. And to be quite honest, last year when I found out that Sam had relapsed again and it was fentanyl, which is, Russian roulette at the best, I had one morning where I was 1 foot in struggling and 1 foot in thriving. And I very intentionally put both feet in thriving. And I turned over his journey to a higher power and my journey to a higher power. I don't care what you call it. It's not important. But I did believe in something larger than myself. And we went forward. So self-care is non-negotiable. So I created an emotional and energetic management plan for myself. These are the things that I do every single day. These are the things I do every single week. These are the things I do every other week. These are the things I do every month. These are the things I do on a quarterly basis and on an annual basis because I want really to thrive in the midst of this. Your morning routine is mission critical. It lays the foundation and launches you into your day. So I have a very rigorous morning routine that really starts with gratitude. Once my eyes pop open in the morning, I'm into gratitude at that point. And I go through my gratitude. And quite frankly, at this point, I am grateful for the opportunity to rise in the midst of this disease. This disease has been a tremendous gift, honestly, for me, my family, and for Sam. And it has caused us to reach for a higher level of consciousness in who we are in the world. And honestly, I would never have done that if it hadn't been my son. He is the catalytic person that made me rise or gave me the opportunity to rise, and I seized it. And then the 3 keystones, this comes from Thrive, Ariana Huffington's book. Great sleep, meditation, 30 minutes of walking a day. Get yourself outside. Another piece that's mission critical, your community. I have several communities that I have surrounded myself with, which has made me thrive, helped me to thrive. And so what I learned in business was that 95% of your success or failure is directly determined by who you surround yourself with. It's the same in life. So when you get these slides, print this one off. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Because who's ever in these little bubbles is who you become. So what's your aspiration for who you are, personally and professionally? Be choiceful about it. I chose people that were positive, would have my back, would not judge me in the midst of my journey because it was messy. People that would love each of us in the midst of our journeys. And then I asked more powerful questions. And I've learned to embrace the notion that when life feels like it's falling apart, it's actually falling together. Life wasn't just happening to me, it was actually happening for me. And embracing that belief and that notion, again, was a pivotal turning point for me. Because if it was happening for me, then what were the gifts and opportunities that were embedded in all of these experiences? And leaning into that question on a daily basis, I began to kind of capture the gifts, the lessons, the opportunities that were embedded in all of these experiences. And you're seeing some of them today, is these knowings. So your mindset is a skill set that can be learned. This isn't just it. We can actually change. And for me, I think, with all the brain science information that we have now, we are so blessed to know that we can change our neural pathways. We can change how we respond to things. We can take more of our power back. We can learn how the operating system works, which is our brain. Our brains are meant to protect us based on old training. And lots of times they're getting in our way. So we kind of have to learn how to override the system. And these kinds of beliefs, these kinds of questions begin to kind of override that system. So I learned what was my responsibility and what was Sam's responsibility. My responsibility is my words, my behaviors, my efforts, my actions, my mistakes, my ideas, the consequences of me. My responsibility is not what Sam's doing, what other people are doing. I'm not taking that on. I just need to be focused on me and being the best version of who I am. And again, loving with boundaries. So one of the most powerful things I learned along the way too was that if you can find a successful role model who has achieved what you want to achieve, somebody who's thriving in the midst of the chaos and the destruction of this disease, and then learn what they do in order to thrive, that's incredibly powerful. So no matter who you choose to be in the midst of all of this, find a role model and learn how they did it. And understand, however they have done it, it is a messy journey. Trial and error, mistakes, things that didn't work, finding their way. It's not a straight shot. It is an up and a down and an up and a down. And hopefully those downs are a little lower and those ups are a little higher each time you go through something. And then I would encourage you to be super choiceful about the podcasts that you listen to, the books you read, the online training that you get, the coaches you work with, the books that you read. Because everything that we take in at this point absolutely informs and influences who you are. So those instruments, those tools are part of my community, my tribe. So I very rarely listen to the news now. That's not where I start my day, for sure. I start my day with uplifting, inspiring, either readings or books. I've retrained my Facebook page to give me higher perspective, quotes every morning, funny things, great people that are really talking about a higher intentionality about living a choiceful, positive life, skill sets that I want to embrace and become better at. And so my strong encouragement is be super choiceful. You're in charge. So your mindset and your attitudes, mission critical to successful thriving. And again, I want to just give the exclamation point to this is everything can be learned. These are all skill sets that can be learned, that you can embrace. So pick one that you want to get better at. Find somebody who's really good at it. Find a podcast to listen to. Find a book to read. When Sam relapsed last year, I was like, okay, I got to up my skills. And I picked Byron Katie's Loving What Is off the bookcase shelf. And I pulled Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth off the bookcase shelf. And that's all I read for a month. So I was like, I need to rise in terms of my skill sets and what I was thinking and what I was feeling, because that was tough. Not knowing and getting comfortable with the unknown and not knowing is part of this journey. And the truth of the matter is, that's life. We have no idea. I mean, I could go out today to another client meeting and get, have a car accident. We just don't know from moment to moment. And so learning to be present in the moment and grateful for the moment that we have is part of the journey. So I threw these slides in because they were super helpful for me to stay focused in terms of, what does negative energy look like? What does positive energy look like? And again, I have these up in my office, so they are front and center for me to see on a regular basis. I'm a visual person, and so seeing things on a consistent basis that keep me centered and focused in the direction of positive energy, giving and joyful. And I'm very keen about touching joy throughout my day. I'm very keen about happiness is a choice that I get to embrace. I'm not just going to sit here and wait for happiness to show up or for joy to show up. I'm actually going to create those things for myself. And that's part of this journey. And then learning how to be calm in the storm. And I did learn this also from another experience where on the backpacker, I was in the backcountry. We were doing a river crossing and I lost my footing in the river and I almost drowned. And when I got out of the water, I had trained myself at that point. I got up out of the water and I immediately dropped into, what are the gifts and lessons embedded in this experience for me? And I will say it was a profoundly calm experience at the point of not knowing whether I was going to live or die. And when I need to go back to that calm, I go back to the river. Gratitude. Having a practice of gratitude affects so much of your mental set, your physical set, your spiritual set, your body. When you're in gratitude, you're not awash in cortisol. You're not in fight, flight, or freeze. 80% of Americans are in fight, flight, or freeze. This is where they reside on a regular basis. So the people that you're going to be talking to, that are family members, potentially friends, that have somebody that they love, this generally is where they're going to be. That's why your being the calm in the storm is just so, so helpful. And most of the time, what I find is that when I am centered and the calm in the storm from an intentional place, and I breathe more slowly, and I am more calm energetically, they will calm and begin to breathe with me in a calmer way. They can sense your calm. So perfect the skill set of being the calm in the storm. Yeah, I talk a lot about love with boundaries. I think it's a courageous act to love somebody who is in the midst of addiction. And a lot of people get caught up with wanting to change them, fix them, control them, and they're not doing what they want them to do. We really do need to put that aside, because the shame, the anger, the yelling at them, the trying to control them, get them to do what we want them to do is totally a failed strategy. Every addict I've talked to, including my son, will say, you're just driving me deeper into desperation and shame and guilt. And it takes longer to get to recovery because you're just kind of covered up with the shame and the stigma and the judgment that goes with, your disease. So another couple things, happiness chemicals. Again, be more intentional. These are actually things that you can do and build into your lives. This is what I recommend to people. And I mean, the first thing I ask them generally is, okay, what are you doing to take care of yourself? And I will tell you, most family members will go, what? What? Take care of myself? Yes. What are you doing to take care of yourself? This is mission critical to be sure that you are taking care of yourself so that you can be there for the person that you love. Because if you deplete yourself, who are they coming home to? They need an example and a role model of loving yourself, putting yourself as a priority for self-care. I talked to a CEO whose son was addicted also, and he had asked his son, what can I do to support you? And his son said simply, do your work, Dad. Do your work, Dad, and I'll do my work. So these are a few little things in terms of you're doing your work. A few more, endorphins, serotonin. I talk quite a bit about get a laughing buddy. Who can you call up or who do you work with that is just hilariously funny? I have several people. And when I need a laugh, I'm on the phone getting a hold of them so that I can lift my energy back up. And that one little hack is incredibly helpful. Move your body. Get up and move. If you feel yourself starting to slide into a little bit of sadness, maybe some hopelessness, maybe I can't fix this, frustration, whatever it is, our emotions have a physicality to them. So change your physicality. Get up, stand upright, move around, shift the energy, and be intentional about where you want your energy to be going. So that's why getting outside, mission critical. Walking, mission critical. Sun, mission critical. So there's a consciousness of choices. There's a focused intention. These are all skill sets to learn, adopt, and up-level. I'm encouraging you to create new thought patterns and behavioral patterns. And what we know is generally that we all have stuff that happens to us when we're growing up. And we make choices about that. And those choices inform and influence the patterns that we run as we're adults. Those patterns can be changed. Because at some point, usually in our 30s and 40s, those patterns tend to stop being useful. Like my pattern was to be the responsible one because I grew up in a chaotic household. My mom was addicted to prescription medications. My brother subsequently became a cocaine addict. At 13, I was surrounded by the chaos as a youngster growing up. And so I was like, okay, well, somebody's got to be the adult in the room because my dad was out doing his thing. And I carried that pattern forward with me for years until I realized that it wasn't serving me. I didn't need to be the responsible one all the time. I actually needed to learn how to ask for help and accept it. And have other people around me that were equally as brilliant, successful, courageous, geniuses in their own areas of expertise and be great with that. I didn't need to be the one. And so laying that pattern down and recreating anew has been a lifelong journey. And every time I have experienced this along the way, marrying a Vietnam vet with post-traumatic stress and alcoholism, I kept leveling up and getting better and better and better at love with boundaries, taking care of myself, And Sam was that last catalytic push to get me to rise to higher skills. Because there's nothing like a child to call you to a higher consciousness or a higher version of yourself. He was the one who cracked me wide open and allowed me the gift of experiencing my own sense of thriving. And then learning how to help others thrive in the midst of the chaos, the destruction, the devastation, all the things that swirl around addiction. And I truly believe at this juncture, because we are so inundated with this disease as a country and globally, that this is the calling for us to rise. Because otherwise, where are we going to go? Where are the people that we love that are dealing with addiction? Where are they going to come to if we're not thriving and there to meet them? So this is Sam and I. This is a few years ago. And in between, obviously relapses and rehab. And you can see the joy on both of our faces because I still was going to love him no matter what part of his journey he was in. And you can see the light and bright. And then you also know what it looks like when they're in addiction mode. And so keep the light and bright at the forefront. Because no matter who you interact with, they are the son of, the daughter of, the mother, the father, the aunt, the uncle, the grandparent of somebody that you love. And they're struggling with this disease themselves. And so choose a different way. Choose to thrive in the midst of the chaos.
Thank you, KL.
You're welcome.
So we have, I'll start with a comment that came through the chat. It says, I recently read a book, You'd Be Home Now by Kathleen Glasgow.
Okay.
It's more for young adults, which wasn't realized at the time, but it was read anyway. It was indicated this is a very good book, which focuses on the family, specifically the younger sister's perspective of a family member with addiction. So first, are you familiar with that one?
I am not. And so thank you for that. I mean, there's so many things out there and I'm always looking for great books. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And then kind of following up on that, similarly, I'm going to take a question from Laura and kind of add a little bit to it. So you referenced throughout your talk a few different resources that helped you find your way through all of the chaos. Do you have any other specific resource recommendations, such as books, podcasts, things of that nature that can help our agents understand, our social workers understand, or also help families?
Well, we have a list of books on our website. So I would say Dope Sick was a great book on the front end. I did also read A Beautiful Boy. This was in the early stages. And what I would recommend is that as you read these books, don't take everything as the gospel. I would read a book and I would take the things that absolutely resonated with me, and then there were things that wouldn't resonate with me. So if it resonates and you get a feel that it's really true, then grab a hold of it. So Dope Sick was great. There's also the series, a 6-part series that Michael Keaton was in. I think that was brilliantly done in terms of understanding kind of a little bit how we got here as America. And but also the doctor becomes addicted and you can see the transformation, and you can see when he goes to rehab himself, he's like, so is this going to work? He's asking, is this going to work? So Dope Sick. Let's see. I think the video that I referenced earlier, that helped me a lot to understand survival taking the first position in our brains and wrestling through, is this a choice or is this a a disease. So that's Pleasure Unwoven, a personal journey about addiction. And oh geez, there's so many books. Just go to the website and pull the resource of books up. And Shelby, I'm happy if you pull it up and send it out with the PowerPoints. Also, that's great. I do, like I said earlier, I pulled, Byron Katie's book off the shelf, Loving What Is, Eckhart Tolle's work. I love podcast wise. Well, you found me on the Addicted Mind podcast, which I was a guest on. Obviously, we do a podcast through Thriving Families, but for me, understanding the addict's mind was wow, so helpful. And then understanding, okay, how do we thrive in the midst of this? So there's so many people: Mel Robbins, Tony Robbins, Brene Brown. She's done a whole series on our emotions. Listen to people like that. Super, super helpful. I just listened to a podcast on Tony Robbins with Mo Gaudat, who used to be the business officer for Google, who lost his son. And he talks a lot about retraining the brain. And it's a fascinating listen to. So I would just go searching and seeing what the associated podcasts are are with those podcasts that you're listening to. Don Miguel Ruiz wrote a book called The Four Agreements. Brilliant read. And it's also one of the things that they recommend in recovery for addicts. Yes, absolutely. Glennon Doyle, fantastic. What I would say is Al-Anon was not a fit for me. And statistically, what we know is that about 10% of loved ones, it's a fit for them. So then there's this whole 90% of us out there. And the reason I did Voices Encouraged was because I felt like I needed to cobble together what I needed to support my thriving in the midst of it. I have people that are in Al-Anon that is a great fit for them. So again, find the thing that is a great fit for you. If it's not helping you get where you want to go from an intentional, focused perspective, continue to look.
Thank you for all those recommendations. And I will get that website sent out with the PowerPoint when we share that.
Great.
So looking at the chat, we don't have any other questions that were submitted. Maybe we'll give another minute. If anybody has a last minute question, please type it into the chat. Otherwise, you have KL's contact information. I'm sure she would love to hear from you if you have concerns or interests further.
Absolutely. So people can reach out to me through the website. And so it's super helpful for me to know from others, like what are they experiencing? What are they going through? What's working for them? And that's always great feedback. So what works, what doesn't work is a great construct for understanding and kind of going through this in a more powerful way instead of looking at it through the lens of that's good or that's bad or that's right or that's wrong. I would, again, it's another mind construct is what works in helping me get there, what doesn't work in helping me get there.
Well, in the chat, it looks like we have a lot of comments thanking you for presenting, saying your experience is going to help a lot of people understand better what we experience out in the field. So
Fantastic.
thank you again for sharing your story, and thank you attendees for joining the session and engaging. It's always nice when we have attendees that have questions or further recommendations to engage in the discussion. So with that, I want to remind everyone that the closing keynote will be starting at 11:15. You would have received that Zoom link when you registered. If you have issues with it or didn't get it, email that box that I indicated earlier and somebody will help get that link to you. So with that, thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your morning and afternoon.
Great. Thanks, Shelby. So did that hit the mark?
I think so. I think that was a great talk, and just, your story is pretty incredible to know all of the things that you've gone through and your courage and willing to help other people going through the same thing or something similar. It's inspirational, to say the least.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I certainly hope it helps. because the people that I referenced, man, they were so helpful, and I've reached out to both of them to let them know how important they were in those early days. So,
I will be sure to send out that website so people can look at it, get information, and hopefully use those resources to help themselves, their family members, their clients, and their families. Because, like you said, this epidemic that we're in, uh, the more we can do, the better.
yeah. I mean, I generally think at this point, I mean, the judicial system and the jail system, corrections, all of that, you all are kind of handling the heavy load at this point from an institutional perspective because there aren't enough rehabs. And then personally, y'all deal with it too. So,
Well, it looks like we had a last minute question coming here, even though most
okay.
of our people are logging off. But it
Okay.
looks like
Sure.
Leah submitted. What do you recommend for resources for younger children with a parent that struggles with addiction?
That's a really great question. Wow. If they don't have a family member that's willing to kind of guide them in the midst of it, I didn't. And so, as I think a 10, 11-year-old, I actually went to the library and started reading autobiographies. And then I didn't have the courage to ask for help when I was that young. I remember my dad, when my brother was in his addiction mode, my dad took us to a psychiatrist once, and that was a fail. you know? So, and I didn't have the agency to take myself to a counselor. So, that is a tricky navigation. What I would say is if you know someone who is a younger person who is struggling with, then reach out to them and just I don't know that you can actually talk to them about it until they feel safe enough with you to potentially begin to share their story. And then if they do have a family member that can help them get to counseling and be super choiceful about who you go to. I have a counseling degree, and you're looking for that top 10% of counselors. You're not just looking for any counselor. So be choiceful about who you take your kids to counseling. I got Sam in counseling when he was like 4.5, 5 years old. And it's still, I'm sure it was helpful, but it didn't stop what was coming. So those are the first things that kind of come to mind.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, with that, I will end the recording and the meeting. Thank you. You have a
All
good
right.
day.
All right. Take care.